Thank you. So welcome to our 11th global meeting of Open the Doors 2030. My name is Michael Page. We start by acknowledging the lands on which we meet, in my case, the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains. And for our guest, Nigel, he's in Melbourne, so he's on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. We pay respects to elders past and present, and we also acknowledge anyone with any experience of dementia. Today is International Human Rights Day. OTD 2030 is a human rights movement which is part revolution, part resource. And this year has rapidly become a community of global practice with over 600 door openers across more than 25 countries. Together, we are already making an impact and we are leading conversations that are so important in this area. Today's facilitators are the multi-talented Maury Voisey-Barlin, the irrepressible Monique Popkran, and the stupendous Rhiannon Toohey. During and after the presentation, we'll have a Q&A, so please do start writing comments into the chat, and one of the team will pick out those that stay on mute until we pick out your questions. But Nigel's going to pause throughout his presentation to take questions or comments. And at the end, I hope we've agreed, Nicole, you're going to do a brief wrap-up of the year for OTD towards the end of the session.
Oh, I agree. Yeah, thank you.
So today we're fortunate to have as our guest speaker Dr. Nigel Paine. Nigel's bio is on our website and will be in the newsletter. And it's a very extensive bio, Nigel. I'll just say Nigel is from the UK and Australia now, and he has a worldwide reach as a researcher and a leader in the field of learning and organisational culture. He's been head of learning at the BBC and regularly speaks at conferences across the world. He has a professorship from Napier University in Edinburgh, is a fellow of the CIPD, LPI, the RSA, and a Mazie Learning Fellow in the USA. Nigel has a doctorate from Middlesex University, where coincidentally I trained as a nurse many years ago. I was introduced to Nigel's work when I found the excellent From Scratch podcast, which he co-presents with Martin Cousins, which is up to about 250 podcasts now, I think. And that has certainly inspired my learning since I found that. Nigel's books on learning are well-researched and inspirational. While he's not involved directly in the aged care sector, his latest book, The Great Reset, Unlocking the Power of Organisational Learning, resonates strongly with many of the experience we have in aged care and in trying to influence change via this community of practice. So everyone, could you please give a big OTD welcome to Dr. Nigel Paine.
Thank you. Thanks very much indeed. It's good to be here, and thanks for the invitation, Michael. I loved your introduction. My name is Michael Page. If you listen to my podcast, I go, my name is Nigel Paine. And what I'm doing is subtly quoting Michael Caine, who used to say, my name is Michael Caine. So some people recognize that, not many, but anyway, it gives me great pleasure to hear it echoed back, Michael. Thank you. What I want to do is just to talk to you a little bit about what you're trying to do, but not from a dementia or an aged care perspective, because I would be remiss of me to try to take any knowledge away from you. You're the expert group. But just to talk about expert groups and to talk about how you can maximize the opportunities in front of you, and the fact that you're already representing countries all over the world. Good luck. I really hope that this works. It's a really important subject, and it's one where knowledge sharing is absolutely critical. So building organizational learning is fundamental for you. So that's my first slide. And the more perceptive amongst you will realize that that is a fly's brain, a little fly. And when I arrive in Tullamarine, there is always a welcoming reception of flies, and they join me at Tullamarine, and I can never get rid of them while I'm in Australia. I can be standing in a group, and I'm the only one seemingly covered in flies. They just seem to love me. But let's talk a little bit about this. This is the first time ever in the history of mankind that an entire brain has been electronically mapped. And what that means is it means mapping the actions of 130,000 cells. And believe it or not, there are 50 million connections embedded in that brain. And what that means, if you do the maths, is 384 connections per cell, per cell. Think how big a fly's brain is, and think how complicated that is. So this is the first animal insect that anyone has been able to map, because it's a relatively simple construction. But they've learned a lot just from that simple construction. The first thing they've learned is that the reason why flies, and if you look on the left and right hand side, you'll see the eyes, the cells in the eyes. And so if you kind of look at it, you can almost see a fly's head in that image. Now, what they've discovered is that when a fly sees anything coming into its visual path, a signal is sent from the eye to the opposite limb. What that means is the fly goes, if someone's coming in from the left, the fly goes right. And it doesn't have to be cognitively processed. It's just an instant from the brain to the muscles, the fly goes. And they also discovered that in the middle of the brain is like a kind of donut, and that's a gyroscope that helps the fly maneuver. So when you swat it, it manages to go left, go right, and go anywhere but near the fly swat. So even though a fly is not the world's smartest animal, it's unbelievably complex. Now, just think of a human being. A human being has 800 million cells. So the connections is a number I cannot begin to pronounce, and I can't even imagine the number of noughts. It's extraordinarily complex, the human brain, and that makes us different. But that's not the reason why we differentiate ourselves from other mammals. The reason why we differentiate ourselves from other mammals is this. It's that we, unlike any other mammal, access other people's thoughts and ideas in detail. So there is such a thing as collective intelligence, and we manifest it every day of our lives when we use language. And you can argue that if mammals have a simulation of reality in their heads, and that's how, for example, an ape manages to jump from tree to tree without breaking branches or falling over. It doesn't cognitively process each tree and look at it and go, that's likely to bend a little bit. No, that's not likely to bend at all. Oh, that will snap, I better avoid it. It's instinctive because it's got that simulation of reality. But human beings have got collective simulations of reality. So we draw upon the knowledge and experience of everyone else, and we build on that. Now, this is not very new. It's relatively new. We've known about it for maybe 30 years, but hardly any organizations that I've anything to do with realize that simple fact that if you shape people, the organizational structure around helping people connect and come up with new solutions to problems by accessing other people's thoughts and ideas in detail, we end up with something much bigger than the individual. But if you go to most organizations, what do? They put people in rows, they turn to work on their own, they give them KPIs, they bonus them on the individual performance. Exactly the opposite of what makes us special and what makes us a better organization. And this is Lev Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. Lev Vygotsky came up with this in the 70s. He observed children. What he worked out was that if you focus on an individual, there is an area of their own learning. But if you put them in connection with peers and you build peer groups consciously, you get a much, much bigger area of learning, and the learning grows exponentially. And beyond that, it's too hard, too close, and it's too easy. But there's this zone where you work with people and you learn and you grow and you develop so much faster if you do everything collectively. This is not really brand new. It's 30 years old. And again, how many people have been in organizations where you're told, no, don't talk to them. You haven't got time to do that. Get on and do your own work. We're so focused on individuals, individualization. And what is also clear is that you are trying to set up what I call a community of practice. And we'll talk a bit about that later. But if you are trying to set up a community of practice, then that by its nature is about building on the collective. It's building a learning community and sharing and extending your own knowledge by engaging with the knowledge of others. And that to me is extremely productive and very, very powerful. But there are certain conditions which need to be fulfilled. And I'm going to go on to that in a minute. But the first point is that a community of practice believes this. Many, many people running learning and development in organizations do not believe it. They think that their job is to take codified knowledge and share codified knowledge. When the really interesting stuff is when you focus on knowing, the process of building knowledge, knowing. And a community of practice is all about knowing. It's not about knowledge. And most failed communities of practices are ones where someone says, I have the knowledge here, I'll tell you lot, and you absorb it, and then we'll be much better across the piece. A community of practice is about knowing. And in the case of dementia, there is a huge amount of knowing to be done, some knowledge, but a huge amount of knowing. How do we accelerate the knowing? By working together across nations, across teams, across specialisms. That's really fundamental and important. And it doesn't upset me, but it frustrates me that we still feel that we ignore the knowing and hone in on the knowledge. It's kind of a waste of energy. And we miss that rich process of kind of in the weeds, battling around with certain ideas and concepts and testing and trying. If you can make that conscious rather than happens unconsciously, I think organizations and communities of practice will go so much further. But I talked about conditions, and these come up, they're in my new book, and I didn't write these and then write around them, find some examples. The values came late and emerged out of the research. And I'll just go through them very, very quickly. And the 5 values are a precondition for building that community of practice that you've talked about and I've talked about. The first one is value relevant is the key word, work systems and processes. In other words, if you have work systems and processes that don't work, change them. If you need new work systems and processes that will be relevant and helpful, build them. And so many how many people have you talked to who say, in spite of it, in spite of that, I managed to do it. In spite of that stupid system we have to use, in spite of those ridiculous rules, in spite of that silly protocol, I managed to do decent work. It should be the other way around. What do you need to do decent work? And then we'll build the systems around that. So work systems should always be under review, constantly under review. The second one, I had a lot of flack about, but I kind of picked it as my number one now. And that is that the human decency and kindness pay back massively. If you treat people well, they treat you well. If you create an environment where people feel unthreatened and unafraid, they will deliver in spades. And to me, that is just a de rigueur. It's essential for a community of practice. There's decency and kindness. You don't snap at people who say things wrong. You don't push hierarchy. I'm more important than you. All of that stuff destroys communities of practice. And the lack of decency and human kindness massively affects productivity, I believe. And I've got some evidence for that. The second is, I believe the unit that we should be working to is small groups, not individuals. Small group targets, small group bonuses, small group aims and aspirations, not individuals. And therefore the group help each other. And I remember I was in Antarctica doing a leadership program. Everyone was divided into groups of 10. And the rule was, because it's dangerous, when you're on the ice, 10 people go out, 10 people come back. You don't have 9 people being the first and one person struggling three kilometers behind. And there's one image that's stuck in my head. I wish I'd taken a picture of it. These 2 big strapping guys, Americans, really huge guys. And between them was this teeny little, I don't know what nationality she was. She was a European woman. And they were kind of dragging her up this ice slope that she couldn't make on her own. And that summed it up. You know, teams and small group working. And the rule was you get no points at all for 9 coming through. It's 10 or nothing. The fourth is to respect your team. People have knowledge and insight right the way through the value chain from top to bottom. And so many organizations have a value attached to knowledge linked to hierarchy. You are more senior than me. Your knowledge is more important. And that is not true. That is not true. I think that if you listen, you ask good questions, you get so much more out of the entire group than if you imagine there's some kind of crazy hierarchy on board. And then the fifth one is agility and flexibility. So what stops you doing good work? What do you need? How can we help? Value the ability to move quickly and value flexibility in work practices. Right, I've done my first few minutes and I'm going to stop there and ask if there are any questions that anyone has or any points that anyone would want to make. Am I striking a chord, or are you all thinking, what on earth is he talking about? So I'd be very grateful. Just Josephine, thank you very much. Aaron, Joseph, thank you. Thank you. Good. Excellent. Has anyone got any points or questions? And if not, I'll move on. Hilary, thank you. Coming to move on, Michael, just nod. Yeah, move on. Okay. This next point is really important. This is Wenger, Etienne Wenger. He wrote about communities of practice before he wrote about what did he write about? Before he communities of practice were first in his mind. Sorry, I'm wrong. Situated learning was first. Communities of practice came second. I'm getting muddled up. So communities of practice, 1998. Wenger's written 5 books on communities of practice. They're almost identical. They're not really identical, but it's basically the same argument rehashed and rethought through. So he got something in 98 and he's still talking about it today, and it's incredibly relevant. So what he says is that community of practice is about social learning. It's not about, I used to know Wenger quite well a long time ago. And Wenger used to go crazy when people said, community of practice is about sharing. He'd say, no, it's not about sharing. You don't go into a room to share. You go into a room to work, to learn, to solve problems. Sharing is a byproduct. It's not the product. So social learning is a change in understanding that goes beyond the individual. That's really important, a change in understanding that goes beyond the individual to be situated in the wider social units or communities of practice through social interactions between actors within social networks. So it's about focusing on problem solving, raising the level of understanding, doing stuff. It's not about sitting, drinking tea and saying, well, I'd like to share this, I'd like to share that. It's about focusing on big issues and trying to work together to resolve those big issues. It's a really important point that Wenger makes. And now back to his earlier book, Situated Learning, which came 7 years before. What he coined is this phrase, legitimate peripheral participation, which sounds incredibly complicated, but it's really simple. What he's saying is that a good community of practice is always in flux. There are always newcomers who work on the periphery. That's why it's called legitimate peripheral participation. They're not idiots or failures or newbies that we ignore. They are on the periphery and they are bringing new insight into the mature practice of the old timers in the middle. And when we say old timers, I don't mean old timers like me. I mean people who've been around for a little bit in the community of practice. And what that means is that in time, the newcomers move to the center The old timers move to the periphery, and it's churning. And it's churning through that engagement, interaction, collaboration, and the learning of new skills, new information, absorbing new data. And then that boundary is really flexible. It's not, this is our, and I've seen so many failed community practice where I say, no, you have to apply to become a member of my community of practice. I was working in one organization, the chairman, there'd been a chairman for 10 years of this community of practice. And he defined the agenda. He said who could leave and who could join. He controlled everything. It wasn't a community of practice at all. It was a kind of ego show for this individual. So the boundary has to be flexible. And so therefore, new people are welcomed in if they've got something to contribute. And people who've been at the center can move to the periphery if they want to. It doesn't matter. It's just the churn. And the key is the group learning more? Is it collaborating better? Is it sharing its knowledge around the place? And what are people taking from the community to put back into their own individual roles and their own individual jobs? Again, it's really important that the output is better work, not I had a great cup of coffee or, oh, I got to talk to Michael for an hour. This is not the focus. The focus is doing better work, contributing to your own workflow. So, if you're in New South Wales, what are you learning from the rest of Australia? And what are you learning from Europe and the US and the rest of the world? There's so much in this area, such a fluid, emerging area, to not be rigid. And I would urge you not to set rigid rules for your group and to recognize who's on the periphery and say, this is great to have you on the periphery. There's nothing wrong with being on the periphery, but it's also great to move from the center to the periphery if necessary. So that's the heart. Those two last slides are at the heart of communities of practice. So it's about engaging through space and engaging openly, asking great questions, collaborating, and so on. Very important. And it's kind of similar to, this is the model in my book of organizational learning. And you can see I'm a great believer in that fluid outside. You have to connect to the inside to the outside. You can't look as a group, as a community base, see yourselves as kind of hermetic. You've got to be leaky. And that connection impacts on culture. If you've got an external environment that doesn't match the internal culture, change the internal culture. Don't keep the internal culture. So there's a balance between the internal culture and the external environment. And you're going to have to absorb big shifts in policy, in funding, in knowledge, and say, how does that affect our organization? Otherwise, you just detach. You go floating off into the empyrean like a bubble, and that isn't very good at all. But what I'm saying is that the model is connecting people with ideas in the right kind of spaces to measure impact. Always test and measure. What are we learning? What has happened? Why has it happened? And then at the heart of that is what I call the organizational brain. And the organizational brain is more than the collection of the individuals. It's like Wenger said, if we work together, we actually are capable in a much greater way than we are as individuals. Unlike the poor little fly, work on our collective intelligence. And yet, as I said, most people are frustrated by simply not being able to do that at all. And the learning culture model, which came from the previous book, Workplace Learning, what I'm saying there is that unless you build the conditions for learning, and I would say trust, empowerment, engagement within a diverse group and a leadership that reflects those, you're not at first base. There's no point in saying we'll build a learning culture, but no one trusts anyone. If there's no trust in your community, there's no learning. Trust is fundamental, and trust leads to collaboration. Empowerment leads to sharing. Autonomy leads to engagement. Those three lead to purpose. And then when you've got collaboration, sharing, purpose and autonomy, you end up with the beginnings of a learning culture. So it's at the heart. You start on the outside and you work in, taking account of the pressures that you're under. And as I was writing the book, I realized that what I was actually talking about was three basic needs for intrinsic motivation. So it's called self-determination theory, and it's been around for 40 years, led by Deci and Ryan. It's Richard, not Richter. Oh, well, Matt Richter actually drew that. It's Richard Deci, Richard Ryan, and Edward Deci. And Matt Richter drew the diagram. So there are three basic needs. If you feel you have sufficient autonomy to be able to do your job properly, you have the skills to do your job properly, and you are connected, you feel involved, you feel part of something, that is a definition of intrinsic motivation. And no one yet has given me a better definition of intrinsic motivation. It's robust and researched. So if you can imagine your collective is full of intrinsically motivated people, then you have an explosion of learning occurring. Because people aren't afraid of making mistakes. They're not afraid of being wrong. They're not afraid of saying something that other people will find slightly ridiculous. They will recognize their own limitations. They will recognize their own strengths above all, and they build on strengths. So if you create the right kind of organization, it's just like an energy machine. It just creates that cycle of new insight, leading to new practice, leading to greater insight, leading to better problem solving. On we go, on we go. These things are extremely important. But there's also something else I don't want you to forget. And that is, Elliot Maisy calls it self-engineering. With AI and with our tools, you have the opportunity to build yourselves. So you should be building yourself in order to put that back into the collective. So I've said not self, not self, not self, but there is a self in all of this. You should be willing to develop yourself, to explore ideas, explore new research, and then share what you've learned and put that around the place. So if you're not passing around new research, case studies, academic articles to each other, then you're missing that dimension of self-engineering, which is so much easier to do now than it ever was. When I was doing first bits of research in a different age, you used to get marked on your bibliography. Very good. They're well found. You found those 2 books. They're really good. That's fantastic. Can you imagine? What a joke. You know, if someone ever said, well done, you found those 2 books that are obvious and which takes 1 second search to find. The biggest part of the research was actually assembling your references. Now the biggest part of research is getting rid of all the tens of thousands and coming down to 3 or 4, which actually make a difference. I'm coming to the end now, and we'll have plenty of time to talk. The 5th Discipline by Peter Senge, which was sensational when it came out in 1990. Peter Senge talked about the 5th discipline, and the 5th discipline was systems thinking. So think as systems, not as individual units, really important. But very few people ever talk about what are the other 4 disciplines. So these are the 5 disciplines that Senge thought was the key to learning cultures and learning organizations. And he's not wrong. Senge thought that because he stated those, that was the end of the problem. He said, oh, we've solved organizational learning. We've solved learning forever. We're now going to build totally new organizations based around learning. That never happened because his vision was extremely complicated and still is. I would defy anyone to implement Senge's models. But basically, you do have to have personal mastery. That's your competence. And you need to be working on that and using other people to help you with that. You need mental models. You need to be collectively sharing, leading to that shared vision. Where are you going? What is the aspiration of this community of practice? And how is team learning going to help build that shared vision? And then at the end of it, final pop-out is systems thinking, the way in which we look holistically and not look narrowly at solving problems. And I wish lots of L&D didn't just ignore the systems, but focus much, much more on holistically, rather than just on, we've got to get this new learning program, we're going to deliver this to people. If all the rest of the conditions are wrong, you can deliver learning till the cows come home. Makes precious little difference in my view. So last few points. It's about connecting the organization. It's absolutely about connecting the organization. And you have to connect your organization. You have to have some means of checking the quality of the connections over time, particularly geographically dispersed organizations need to make sure they connect. And a lot of international companies go wrong because they focus on being obedient to the center and not about the connections and joining up those islands which exist inside organizations in one building. They're alone right around the world. And then this is one of my beliefs, that learning happens in the space between people. So you've got to give people space and you've got to build those connections. So if you can join people, the sum of the parts is far, far more strong and resilient than each individual. Because if you've created that network of learning, one person can go and the learning stays. If everything is focused on individual talent, you are talent, you must stay, we really rate you, we're going to give you reward and promotion, and they leave, the whole thing collapses around them because nothing's been shared, nothing's been left behind. So focus on the legacy. You know, community of practice is about legacy. What are you leaving behind? So anyone can leave and anyone can join, and the whole thing stays together really nicely. And just to finish, just if you want the book, there's an ebook which is possibly the easiest to get to. You can get that immediately at a discount off, or you can order it. You know, I ordered one of my own books from Amazon in Australia. They were absolutely useless. I got it in the end, but I think they got it from Germany or somewhere. So even though Amazon is one company, each bookshop operates in a national unit. And the Australian one needs to order some of my books. And the only way it can do that is by people ordering through Amazon and then getting the book. Or you can order it direct from the US, which is instant, but they have to post it from the US and they will charge you for the postage. But it pretty much ends up more or less the same price because you get a bigger discount from ordering from the US. But please take a picture of the QR code. And I'd be very happy now I'd just like to hear what you think, and whether I'm presenting something impossible or I'm presenting a real challenge. I hope I'm presenting an agenda for action, because if it's no action, we're wasting our time, completely wasting our time, I think. So, Maury.
Thank you, Nigel. There's a lot in that for me. I'm always been very interested in culture change, and you've introduced the concept to me of learning culture. If there's anyone with a question, please feel free to raise your hand or chuck it in the chat as we wait. But just to get things started, Nigel, I was very interested in what you said about learning happens in the space between people and connecting in an organisation, like opening doors. One of the criticisms that has come to us is, well, how do we make any change because we don't have any power within the aged care system? Yeah. So I guess I'm interested in your thoughts in how does an advocacy group and a bunch of infiltrators work in changing a bigger system that doesn't want to move?
Usually the best way is not to sort of jump up and down and say, woe is me, why don't you listen to me? I know everything and you're not listening to me and it's not fair. You learn by doing. So in other words, what that means is that you actually show the results of your thinking and you reveal some of the good work that's going on around the world and say, do you want some of that? And sometimes, even in spite of that, organizations will say, no, we didn't invent it. But largely, you'll get people's attention. So to me, the best thing you can possibly do is share success. And it doesn't have to be locally. It can be nationally, statewide, nationally, internationally. And you've got access to, if you think about it, you've got access to so much more knowledge and power and insight than anyone in a local little organization who never looks beyond, what's going on in Western Sydney or whatever. So I think you stop whinging, get on and do stuff would be my recommendation, which is probably unkind, but I do think that we need that. Nicole, you've got your hand up.
I do, thank you. I love listening to you talk about leadership, by the way. I could listen to this subject all day, because it reminds me of, you know, what we need to put in practice and keep yourself in check as an organisation. I find that there is a distinct lack of culture change or a drive to implement culture change in nursing homes around Australia. How do you also see what I see? I do not see a big enough investment to change systems, grow people, and it disheartens me, because I think, 50 grand here, 100 grand here, or investing heavily in this robust systems that will sustain time and past individuals. How do you think we can promote culture change in this country, or do you also see a gap like I do around the world in people willing to invest?
It's a huge gap. But give you a case study. One of the organisations that won a learning award about probably 5 or 6 years ago was an organisation that bought a failed chain of nursing homes in the UK because they were just dreadful. You know, the service they were delivering was neglectful, and bad things were happening, and forcibly the owners were forced to get out. And the group that bought it didn't get rid of the staff, say, well, we need fresh staff, start again. They said, no, we've got good staff. They're just being badly managed. And they did what I think is fundamental. It's all the way through my book, and that's something called field work. They spent time in each of the homes in the group, and they said, what's stopping you doing good work? What's holding you back? And people did not hesitate to let rip and said, well, if we had that, and when they added it all up, it wasn't much. They didn't say, we need a brand new building and double my salary and I need a company car. They didn't say anything like that. They said things like, can we have access to a laptop between us so that we can share good practice? Can we have a system that records successes and failures so that we can actually look at shifts come in and what's gone on and what's gone wrong? Can we have a better team working organisation? So they just did what people said they wanted. And the result was it went from a failing operation to one that when it was reviewed by whichever agency it is in the UK reviews nursing homes, came out top. So it's just a case of listening to people, getting in there. Yeah. Field work. Do your field work. So many people sit behind an office desk, 50 miles or 50 kilometres away, and just imagine they're absolutely useless, that lot. What the hell? What are we going to do? We can't fire them all. We just shout at them. Now, shouting at people, in my experience, never did very much in the way of productivity and gains and increases. But that's what happens. Everybody blamed, shouted at. And when bad things happened at this nursing home chain, they simply found a scapegoat and fired them. That was your fault. No one ever looked at the systems thinking. Never looked at the system that led to that. People overtired, not having the proper backup, working on their own when they needed other people around them. So find what's going wrong and make recommendations for putting it right. And give people what they want as far as it's possible. And often what people want is incredibly modest. They don't ask for the world. They just ask for a little bit of respect, this small change in resources, and often just reorganize the way people work together and stop the individual blame culture and stop the organizations which think that because you're down on the ground floor, you're expendable and totally unimportant in the system. Because at the end of the day, they are the most important people. They're the ones face on to customers or clients or whatever you want to call them, patients. And that's the essence of it. So field work and give people an attempt to grow their practice, to build and develop their competencies. So you can do that formally. Maybe you need a partnership with a provider, a TAFE or something like that. Or it just means that you've got a handbook, that one company gave everyone a learning passport. And it literally looked like a passport. And they built these stamps. So if you got this level, you got a stamp in your passport. And people proudly carried that passport around with them. I got shown ones with dog-eared, but they were full of stamps. And people felt there was something really special in consciously growing their competence. And so there's all sorts of things you can do, which don't cost money. Those passports cost, a few dollars each. But it gave people an aim, an aspiration, something to believe in. And that's what you need, really. Instead of people working in despair. Every day they get up thinking, oh, my God, it's going to be awful today. And usually it is awful today. And they come back exhausted and frustrated. Have to go back and get up and do it again. And it just gets worse and worse and worse. And then something bad happens and someone gets fired. That's not the way to go. So I think it's possible to improve. Wouldn't be me, really, if I didn't believe you could improve every organisation. You can, but you need to do it in the right way. And don't bring in consultants from outside who come in and take, just go run a wand over it and say, oh, yes, this is exactly like the other 5 organisations we've been to. This, and this. Michael, you got your hand up. Sorry, I'm over-talking.
Yeah, no, thanks. I've got a few things. I've chucked them in the chat, but I totally agree with your team learning concept. I think we don't do enough of that, particularly in dementia care. I think it's very much individualised. L&D teams have been focused on the best LMS will provide learning, and that's fine. It's individualised because it's cheap. Team learning and problem solving, I think, and the trust, absolutely trusting the teams on the floor to be able to effect their own change. And I think we're two top carpets, again, we're the experts, we feed down to people, these are the protocols. But just my question, I guess, I often get told, you're pie in the sky, particularly around this, bearing in mind I have opened the doors and we have done it, and some of us have actually achieved success in this area. I'm told it's all pie in the sky, and you should stop worrying about best practice, because we have to take baby steps and we have to hit compliance first. If we don't have compliance, then our regulator, the commission, will be on our backs. So stop worrying about best practice, stop worrying about all that stuff, and focus on compliance. What would your view of that model of learning, if it is a model of learning?
Yes, it's true. I think you're right. And everyone likes success. Everyone likes to feel they're in an organisation that is better this week than last week, better this year than last year. And it doesn't have to be dramatically transformed. We have this feeling that everything has to be completely transformed before we have success. Whereas I think if you can get people to register down to constant improvement, then that's the way forward. And then out of that, often transformations occur. But it's just continuous improvement. And everyone has a role in that. When I worked with Toyota in the US in one of their car plants, and they bought the worst performing car plant in America from General Motors, so bad that, the first time the car came off, it was driven down the road, the doors fell off, because someone had forgotten to put the bolts in or the pins in to hold the doors. Just kind of really elementary stuff was wrong. And I talked to the factory manager, who's Japanese, and said, how did you take the, there were people in their average age was over 40, in their 40s and 50s. How did you take people who'd spectacularly failed to build cars and turn it into the most productive car plant in America? And he just looked at me for a moment, he paused and he said, we simply taught them how to build a car. They didn't know. And in some ways, that you've got to take that lesson. Just you work with people to explain how you do the job. And often people have lost that in the need to meet stupid targets and count stuff, focus on all the wrong things. Sometimes just going back to basics can really help. But, be ambitious. If you're not improving day in, week in, year in, then what's going wrong? Something's really going wrong there. So it's really important, I think, if you can in some ways, what you're doing is resetting the mentality, not resetting the learning. You're just getting people to believe in themselves and their knowledge. People have given up. I mean that in many organisations. People have simply given up. They just go through the motions. They get up in the morning, hate their job, go in, do their job, go home, live for the weekend, all that kind of stuff. It's shocking, really. And in an area like aged care, where it's going to be way bigger and way more significant in the next 20 years. To give up at this stage, God help us all, really, if that's what happens. Vicky, you got your hand up.
Yes, Vicky.
Thanks, Nigel. Michael and I have had a couple of conversations about this as well. So often in aged care, you'll hear, don't change anything, don't implement anything new until accreditation's finished. We also hear, so you miss out on great innovation because we have to wait. But a couple of key points that I think, and I'd love your feedback on it, is I often hear L&D departments saying our nurses know nothing, they don't have the knowledge or the skills, and I get angry. The other one is I often see L&D siloed from every other part of the organisation, including my role. How do we change that within organisational structure?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think I agree. I used to say once a long time ago that when you went into an organization, you started off in the beautiful reception area with, aquariums and art, objet d'art. Then you walked through the carpeted executive area and you went out to the thinner carpeted middle management area. And eventually you got to the lino that was wearing out. Then you knew you were close to L&D. Right in the periphery, down in the shed at the back. No one even noticed them. Just working on their own. And in some ways, that has still manifests itself. Just marginalised, ignored L&D, doing their best by throwing LMSs at people. But in some ways, they're not solving the right problems, and therefore they marginalise themselves. And that sounds very cruel. But I've certainly seen evidence, that when you have, like AI, for example, is when you have a crisis in organisations like AI, and L&D turns around and says, "Oh, we can develop content 20% quicker using AI," and there's a huge yawn by the rest of the organisation. We don't care. It's irrelevant. What we care about is how we push AI through with the right kind of systems, the right kind of support. That's a classic example where L&D has a chance to push forward for the whole organisation. And instead, they're going, all the wagons are in a circle and they're huddled looking inward. You've got to look outward. And I ask L&D departments, how many of you have done any field work recently? And many organisations never do any field work. They wait for someone important like Michael to come in the room and say, "We need this." And you say, "Right, okay, we'll do it." Who knows? Who says Michael knows what he's talking about? The only way you know what someone's talking about is you go out and you see for yourself. You talk to the people who supposedly need this. You're told the nurses are incompetent. Go and talk to the nurses. Go and find out for yourself the level of their competence and where the frustrations are. Find it and then come up with your own suggestions that are not beholden to someone who happens to be important. And you often get people using L&D as a deflection from their own failings. They say, get those lots sorted out. They just don't know how to do this. And the reason they don't know how to do this is appalling management by the very person who's saying, get them out there to sort it out. And if you just believe that stuff, you just reinforce all the negative things. And each time you do that, you're pushed further and further into the periphery of the organisation. So get into the heart of it is critical. And I think that L&D should sometimes need to bypass HR. They get sort of sucked into HR vortex. They've got to get in. Unlike HR, they can be right at the heart of the organisation and understand what is really going on and where they can make the biggest difference. And then just do that. And I always say, don't even ask for permission. Just get on and do it. What's the worst that can happen? Nothing much. You get knuckles wrapped. Whereas if you sit there waiting to be told what to do, in a world that is changing so fast and where the challenges are so huge, waiting to be told what to do is probably the worst possible response, as far as I'm concerned.
Wow, thank you, Nigel. I think there's so much more to talk about, but as always, whoever made time didn't make enough of it. I think that we are probably at the end of that, if I am right, Michael. There's a question that Josephine posed, which I might just put out to the group to think about, and maybe people could email in to OTD. Josephine's written in the chat, Nigel, how do we grow the space between people in the Open the Doors community? And I think if we take that away maybe today and have a think how we think we might collectively do that, that might be something
Best question ever. Best question ever, Maury. If you come up with an answer to that, you're going to strengthen the community massively.
Okay, I'll get back to you close of business today, and I'll have that answer for you, Nigel. Michael, I'm going to hand back over to you. Thank you so much, everyone. Big applause.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your participation. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Experience.
Thanks. As always, the newsletter will follow, and we'll put this webinar on the website as soon as possible, possibly tomorrow. I think there are some chat questions. We'll try to include those. We've got 5 or 6 minutes. Nicole, would you like to just take us out to the end of the year?
I would. I just want to say a bit of a story. Never in my wildest dream, back in March this year, when I had this vision of just grabbing all these random different brains with different skills and starting a global human rights movement, which I pitched to Sanal on a bus to Sydney and said, hey, what if we just did this? We've got no money and I don't really know if it'll work, but how about we have this online forum where we talk about different models of care around the world and present them so we can have, rapid knowledge transference, because there's all these busy, burnt out, amazing humans in aged care that do not have the time to do the kind of study I did. We've all got different experiences. We've all read different books. So I pitched it to Monique next. And then I grabbed all these beautiful faces. So Michael, Maury, Aaron, Josephine, Lisa, Rhiannon, and some IT people, Rab and Saga and Sanal. And I just said, let's do it. So we've shared this load since March. We've grown to launching in May. And to have us here in December with 600 plus global networks, a website that was volunteered and put together with, everyone's self-driven. We now have an intern, which is Hillary. And to have the caliber of speakers I never dreamt of, using our own personal networks of 11 of us, Dr. Alan Power, Dolph Becks, David Sherd, Judy Cornish, Susie Singer-Castle and Rick Susie Singer-Carter and Rick Mountcastle. We've had Wendy Hall, Mary Fridley, Vicky de Klerk, Josephine Tite has presented, Dr. Rodney Gilek, we all know him, Dr. Michelle Olsen, Monica Eastway, Nigel Paine today, Dr. Nigel Paine, and also all of the chats with caring creatives, too many to mention, keys to the door, several watch parties, taboo topics. I mean, I never dreamt that was possible back in March, and all of the global community that have made this happen. Thank you so much for being part of Open the Doors, for coming on this vision. I can't wait to see where 2025 takes us. Hopefully a conference would be something amazing. But thank you for believing in a vision that is now a shared vision and not run by one of us. We're all leaders, and that includes the community of leaders that attend all of these sessions every single fortnight. So thank you so much, and a big Merry Christmas to all of you. What a journey, right? Yeah, so.
Thank you, Nicole. Fantastic.
And just to say a final...
Oh, and Dan Cohen, sorry, I missed
Dan
you.
Cohen.
Dan Cohen, I had you there. Thank you for presenting this year. He popped up there.
Yeah.
He's got his hand up as well. Dan, did you want to say something?
You're muted, Dan.
Just a bit muted.
You're muted.
I hit the wrong button. So I'm good.
All right, we've got
this
2
was
minutes.
excellent. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. We've got 2 minutes, so unless there's any other questions, we'll let Nigel go and watch the repeat of the West Ham game. And we'll say thank you very much, Nigel. We hope to have you back again because it's not enough time. We need to hear more.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much,
Great to meet you.
Nigel.
Great to feed off your enthusiasm.
Thank you. And I hope this showed that to date we've focused on dementia topics, but moving forward to next year and those conversations about how we actually affect change or support people to affect change in their context, it's really important to sometimes move out of the aged care and the dementia space into other areas. And I think this was a perfect example of that. So thanks to everyone, and especially those who wore festive attire. We were too many of us bar humbug, but well done. I think
Dolph has made
gets the prize.
Note Dolph's point about switching round to focus on the client group as well, and on their learning and their daily practice. So that was a really good, important suggestion just to finish, I thought. Thank you, Dolph.
Great. Thanks very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay.
Merry Christmas.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Merry Christmas!